My wife hadn't even been in the ground for a day when my son sat in her chair, the chair where she used to knit every afternoon. He looked me in the eye and told me, "Your good life is over, Dad." Then he took my cards. He blocked my accounts. He left me without a single dollar and looked at me like I was trash that needed to be taken out. 82 years of building a life. And in one morning my son wiped me off the map. If this story touches your soul, subscribe. Every day there is a new story that could be yours. Tell us where you are listening from. I still have the smell of the cemetery dirt on my hands. No matter how much I wash them, it is still there. That deep, damp smell of buried things. I still feel the weight of Emily's coffin when we lowered it into the grave. How my arms trembled. How I felt like I was sinking right along with her. And here I am, sitting in my own living room looking at a dead cell phone and some credit cards that are useless now. I have them scattered on the table like cards from a losing hand. My name is Nicholas Garrison. I am 82 years old. 40 years ago I built an auto parts factory that today gives work to 120 families. 40 years of waking up before dawn. 40 years of sweat, of risk, of sleepless nights. But none of that matters now because yesterday I buried my wife. And today my son buried me. Emily died on Thursday at 6 in the evening. I was sitting by her bed just like every day for the last 3 years. I knew every sound in that room. The hum of the air conditioner, the dripping of the IV, the constant beep of the monitor marking her heart. Kidney failure had eaten her body little by little, but she never complained. Not once. That afternoon the monitor started sounding different, slower, more spaced out, like a clock running out of wind. She opened her eyes and looked for me. Those brown eyes that I fell in love with 60 years ago. I grabbed her hand. It was cold, very cold. I tried to warm it with mine, but I couldn't. She squeezed my fingers with the little strength she had left and told me, "It doesn't hurt anymore, my love. It doesn't hurt anymore." Then she took a breath. Once, twice, and the third time the air didn't come back out. The monitor made a flat line and a long beep that I still hear when I close my eyes. And I stayed there with her hand in mine, unable to let go. Not wanting to let go because I knew that when I let go, everything was going to end. The funeral was on Friday. The funeral home smelled like old flowers and candle wax. People came and hugged me and said things I didn't listen to. She is in a better place. She isn't suffering anymore. She was a great woman. Empty words that bounced off my ears without entering. Ethan was there for a while. Serious. Standing in a corner with his arms crossed. He didn't cry, he didn't speak. He just watched. He watched the coffin, he watched the people, he watched me. But he never came over to hug me. That night, I went back home alone. The house was dark and smelled stale. I lay down in our bed on my usual side and hugged Emily's pillow. I buried my face in it. It still smelled like her gardenia perfume. That scent I met when I was 22, and that accompanied me every day since then. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine she was there sleeping next to me like always, that I was going to wake up and everything was going to be like before. But on Saturday at 9 in the morning the doorbell rang and everything went to hell. I opened the door expecting a neighbor with condolences, a basket of bread, some flowers, but it was Ethan. He had a wrinkled shirt and dry eyes. He walked into the house without saying hello, without hugging me, without saying "I'm sorry, Dad," as if he were walking into an office. Behind him came Jessica, his wife, with her head down and her eyes glued to the floor. She didn't look at me. She didn't say anything. Behind her was Ryan, my 16-year-old grandson, who didn't look up from his cell phone even to say hi. I don't even know if he saw me. I offered them coffee. Nobody answered. Ethan walked straight to the living room with firm steps as if the house were his. And then I saw it. He sat in Emily's chair, in the chair where she knitted every afternoon, where she drank her chamomile tea, where she sat to read me recipes from the newspaper while I had breakfast. I felt nausea rising up my chest. The bile reached my throat, but I stayed quiet. I thought maybe he didn't realize. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it wasn't on purpose. Ethan looked at me from that chair like he already owned the place. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't sadness. It wasn't grief. It wasn't anything a son should feel the day after burying his mother. It was something cold, calculated, something I didn't recognize. Or maybe I did recognize it, but I never wanted to see it, he said. "Dad, we have to talk." I nodded. I thought it was something about the funeral, the papers, Emily's will, the insurance paperwork. But then he put his hand in the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a document. A paper with stamps, letterhead, with small print that I couldn't read from where I was. He put it on the coffee table on top of the magazines Emily never finished reading. And he said, "Sign here. It is a power of attorney. Starting today, I am in charge of the accounts, the company, everything. It is for your own good. You are not in any condition to handle it." I looked at him without understanding, without being able to believe what I was hearing. I said, "What are you talking about, Ethan? I buried your mother yesterday. What kind of son are you?" He didn't blink. He didn't move a muscle in his face. He just said, "Precisely because of that." I refused to sign. I told him he was crazy, that he didn't know what he was doing, to get out of my house and not come back until his madness passed. He stood up slowly with the calmness of a snake. He put the paper back in his pocket and looked down at me. He was a head taller than me, and in that moment I realized my son was looking at me like an obstacle, like something that needs to be removed from the path. He said, "Fine, then we do it the hard way. You decide," and he walked toward the door without rushing, as if he already knew exactly what was going to happen next. Jessica followed him without looking at me, dragging her feet. Ryan, too, with the cell phone glued to his face, oblivious to everything, as if nothing was happening. I stayed standing in the middle of the living room with my heart beating so hard against my chest I could feel it in my ears. I didn't understand what the hard way meant, but half an hour later I found out, and the floor opened up beneath my feet. First it was the cell phone. I was in the kitchen pouring myself a glass of water because my mouth was dry when the screen went black all of a sudden. A white message appeared that said, "Line canceled by the account holder." I felt a pit in my stomach. I went to the computer at the desk to check the bank. I sat down, opened the page, put in the usual password, Emily's date of birth with my initials, the one I used for 20 years. Invalid data. I put it in again, more carefully, letter by letter, account blocked. Contact your branch. I felt a cold sweat running down my back between my shoulder blades. My hands started shaking on the keyboard. I went to the landline in the living room. I dialed the bank's number. A recording told me the number was in the process of transfer to another holder. I hung up and stared at the device like it was a dead animal. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. I repeated those words out loud as if saying them could change what was happening. But nothing changed. I walked through the house like a sleepwalker, trying to understand what had just happened. My feet felt heavy. My head was spinning. I went to the desk and opened the drawer where I kept cash for emergencies. A stack I always kept, for years, just in case. $500 in $20 bills wrapped in a rubber band. The drawer was empty. Not a single bill. Not even the rubber band. I felt a hole in my chest. I checked the pockets of all my jackets in the closet, one by one, looking for something, anything, nothing. Loose change, an old piece of gum, crumpled receipts. I went to the bedroom and looked in Emily's nightstand, where she kept a few dollars for Sunday church offering, in a little wooden box her mother gave her, also empty. The little box was there, open, mocking me. Ethan had entered my house before coming to see me. He had gone through everything. He had opened every drawer, every pocket, every hiding place. He had taken every dollar he found. I stayed standing in the middle of the room with my hands shaking, feeling the floor moving under my feet as if there were an earthquake. In less than an hour, my own son had left me without access to the bank. Without a phone, without cash. He had turned me into a homeless man inside my own house. I don't know how long I stood there in the middle of the room staring at nothing. Minutes, hours. Time stopped existing. When I reacted, the sun was already gone and the house was dark. I hadn't turned on a single light. I hadn't eaten anything. I hadn't drunk water. I walked to the living room, dragging my feet, and sat on Emily's sofa, the same one where she knitted every afternoon while I read the newspaper and she told me gossip about the neighbors. I ran my hand over the fabric of the backrest, rough, worn by the years. It still had a thread stuck in it from the last embroidery she didn't manage to finish. A tablecloth with blue flowers she was making for the new dining room. For when we remodel, she used to say, "It is going to look beautiful. The dining room we will never use. The tablecloth she will never finish." I stayed there caressing that thread until my eyes clouded over. That night I didn't eat. I couldn't. My stomach was closed shut, hard as a rock. I felt nauseous just thinking about food. I stayed sitting in the dark without turning on the light, looking at Emily's portrait on the fireplace mantel, the photo from our 50th anniversary. We took it in the garden next to the rose bushes she planted. She was wearing her blue dress that reached her knees, smiling with all her teeth, with her hair up like she liked it. I was hugging her by the waist, looking at her as if the world didn't exist. Because for me it didn't exist. She was everything. I spoke to her out loud in the dark with a broken voice. I said, "Emily, what did I do wrong? Where did I mess up with that boy? How did I raise him so badly? What was he missing? What did he have too much of? What did I do to make him hate me like this?" But she didn't answer. Of course not, because she wasn't there anymore, and I was more alone than ever in my life. I didn't sleep that night, not a minute. I sat on that sofa until dawn, replaying the last few months like a movie. Ethan's visits, more and more frequent, longer each time. The questions about the company, about the partners, about the accounts, about the contracts, about who had authorized signatures. I thought it was interest, that he was finally maturing, that he wanted to learn the business, that he wanted to earn my trust. But no, it was reconnaissance. He was studying the terrain. He was looking for weak points. He was waiting for the right moment to attack. And the right moment was the day after burying his mother. The day I was most destroyed, most vulnerable, most alone, easiest to knock down. He planned it like that, with coldness, with calculation, as if I were an enemy and not his father. But the worst part wasn't what had already happened. The worst part was what was waiting for me outside. Because when I went out to the street the next day, I discovered that my son hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my name. Monday I got up with the decision to go out. I couldn't stay locked between those walls waiting for Ethan to come finish me off. I had to understand how deep the damage went. I had to see with my own eyes how much he had destroyed me. I went to shower and the water came out freezing. The water heater didn't turn on. I stood there under the cold stream, shivering, feeling every drop hit me like a punishment. I dressed in the same clothes as yesterday because I didn't have the mind to look for others. I buttoned my shirt with clumsy fingers. I put on my shoes without socks because I couldn't find any. I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw an old man I didn't recognize, sunken eyes surrounded by purple circles, ashy skin without color like a dead man, a 2-day beard, white and uneven. I looked like a homeless man. I looked like a crazy person. I looked in my wallet, 3 crumpled bills, $40. It was all I had left in the world, all I had to survive. I went out to the street with an empty stomach and a tight heart. The sun hit my face, and I had to squint. I didn't know that today I was going to be humiliated 3 times, each one worse than the last. First, I went to the corner pharmacy on Main Street, and fourth, where I had bought my medications for 10 years. I needed the pill for my blood pressure, the one I take every morning with breakfast. Without it, I could have a crisis at any moment. The doctor had warned me, "Mr. Garrison, you don't play around with your heart." The girl at the register recognized me when I walked in and smiled kindly. "Good morning, Mr. Garrison. How are you? Feeling better?" I told her yes, thank you. That I came for my medicine. I gave her the prescription and waited leaning on the counter looking at the shelves of vitamins and syrups. She prepared the order, put it in a little white bag, and swiped the card through the terminal. The machine made a noise. That noise that you know, declined. She swiped it again. Slower, declined. She looked at me uncomfortable with red cheeks and said, "I am sorry, sir. It is not going through. Do you have another card?" I felt heat rising up my neck. I took out one of my 3 bills and paid in cash. The change was barely enough for a coffee. I left with the little paper bag and a bitter taste in my mouth. But that was just the beginning. The warm-up before the game. I walked to the bank with heavy legs. The Central Branch downtown in the big stone building across from the square. I had an account there for more than 40 years. That is where I signed my first loan to buy machinery for the factory. That is where I deposited my first $1,000,000. The proudest day of my life. Everyone knew me there. The tellers, the guards, the secretaries, the managers. They greeted me by name. They offered me coffee. They attended to me in private. But when I walked in that morning, I saw new faces. Young people with cheap suits and plastic smiles. People who didn't know who I was. I asked to speak with the manager. The receptionist looked me up and down, my wrinkled clothes, my unshaven beard, and said, "Have a seat, please. Someone will be with you in a moment." They made me wait 20 minutes in a hard plastic chair next to the door, as if I were just any customer coming to ask for a loan. Finally, a guy in a gray suit came out, 30-something years old, with gel in his hair and a face like he has more important things to do. He looked at me without any respect and said, "Follow me." And he took me to a small cubicle with glass walls where everyone could see but nobody could hear, like a fishbowl, like a zoo cage. The manager sat behind a particle board desk and opened his computer. He typed something with 2 fingers slowly while I watched him from the other side. Then he frowned, tilted his head, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. He said in a low but sharp voice like a knife wrapped in velvet, "Mr. Garrison, your account has a preventive block. It was requested 2 days ago by a direct family member, a son, according to the record. The reason indicated is—" He paused for a long time, as if it was hard for him to say, as if he felt embarrassed for me. Presumed cognitive incapacity. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. The air left my lungs. I repeated the words like an echo. Cognitive incapacity. He nodded without looking me in the eyes, shuffling papers on his desk. He said, "It means there are doubts about your mental capacity to manage your own resources. It is standard procedure in these cases. Don't worry. It is temporary until the family situation is resolved." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to get up and grab him by the tie and tell him that I had built more in a year than he was going to build in his whole damn life. That I gave work to 120 families while he couldn't even type well. But I couldn't. The words didn't come out. I stayed mute with my mouth open, feeling the world collapsing around me. I got up from the chair without saying anything and walked out of the cubicle. The receptionist said something to me that I didn't hear. The guard opened the door for me. I went out to the street and felt my legs shaking, like they weren't going to hold me up. A cold sweat ran down the back of my neck and soaked my shirt. People passed by me, walking normally, buying things, talking on the phone, laughing, living their lives, and I felt like everyone was looking at me, that everyone knew, that everyone was thinking, "There goes the crazy old man, the one who can't even handle his money anymore." I leaned against a stone wall next to a newsstand and breathed deep several times, trying to calm down. My heart was beating very fast. Too fast. I thought, "I am going to have a heart attack right here in the street. They are going to find me lying here like a dog." I needed to sit down. I needed to eat something, fill my stomach with whatever. Then I thought of the diner, the restaurant where I had lunch for more than 30 years. I had a monthly tab there that I paid punctually on the 1st of every month. Without fail. They knew me there my whole life. They treated me like what I was. There I was, still someone. I walked the 4 blocks to downtown, with my hands shaking and my stomach growling. I entered through the carved wooden door, and Julian the waiter saw me immediately. He smiled with that usual smile and said, "Mr. Garrison, good to see you." The usual table. I sat in my usual spot next to the window overlooking the square where I could watch people pass by while I ate. I ordered the usual. Steak, medium rare, fresh bread, mashed potatoes with gravy, and a coffee with cinnamon. I ate slowly, chewing every bite, trying to taste the meat, the salt, the pepper, trying to feel that I still existed, that I was still the man I had been, the one who came here to close deals, the one who invited his partners to eat, the one who left good tips because he could. I looked around and saw familiar faces. Mr. Patterson in a corner table with his wife eating salad. Mr. Davis from the Rotary Club at another table with some partners discussing something with papers in hand. Dr. Williams at the bar drinking a black coffee. People who had greeted me with respect for decades. People who knew me when this was a small town and I was a boy with big dreams. When I finished eating, I called Julian with a wave of my hand and told him, "Put it on the monthly tab." He nodded, picked up the plates, and went to the kitchen. But he took a long time to come back. Too long, and I felt something was wrong. When Julian returned, he walked slowly and didn't look me in the eye. He had his hands clasped together like he was nervous. He said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "Mr. Garrison, excuse me." "The manager wants to speak with you." I felt my stomach drop. That emptiness one feels when they know something bad is coming. The manager appeared a moment later. A fat guy with a mustache who I had known for years but never really liked. He approached my table but didn't sit down. He stood there looking down at me with his arms crossed over his belly. And he spoke loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear every word. "Mr. Garrison, unfortunately your account with us was cancelled. Mr. Ethan Garrison called yesterday personally to inform us. He left very clear instructions that you are no longer in your right mind. He said not to give you credit under any circumstances, that any debt you incur he is not going to recognize nor pay. I am very sorry. You are going to have to pay in cash." I felt my face burn. Blood rushed to my head. My ears were ringing. I saw it like in slow motion. The couple at the table next to me stopped eating and turned to look at me with their mouths open. I saw Mr. Patterson lean toward his wife and whisper something in her ear, pointing at me with his chin. I saw Mr. Davis lower his head and look at his plate uncomfortable as if he was ashamed to know me. Everyone looking at me. Everyone judging me. Everyone thinking the same thing. Poor old man. He went crazy. He is finished. He is useless now. We should pity him. I took out the 2 bills I had left, $20, and I put them on the table. It wasn't even enough for the coffee. Julian, with sad eyes, said, "Mr. Garrison, don't worry. I will cover it from my tips. No need." But I didn't let him finish. I didn't want his pity. I didn't want anyone's pity. I got up from the chair with my knees shaking and walked toward the door. Every step weighed like lead. Every step was a mile. I felt the stairs stuck in my back like knives, like needles, like burning coals. I went out to the sidewalk and stood there not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go. The midday sun hit my face hard, burning my skin. But I felt cold, a cold that came from inside, from the bones, from the soul. I had no money. I had no phone. I had no one to call. I had nowhere to go. I looked at the cobblestone street I had walked 1,000 times since I was a boy. The same stores, the same trees, the same iron benches, but everything seemed strange to me, as if it wasn't mine anymore, as if I didn't belong there anymore, as if they had erased me from the map and nobody had noticed. I thought about Emily, how she always knew what to do when things got difficult, how she always had a word, an idea, a solution, how she would grab my hand and tell me, "You can do it, my love. You have always been able to." But she wasn't there anymore, and I was alone, completely alone, in the middle of a street full of people. I had never felt so alone in my life. Then I heard a voice behind me, a woman's voice, shy, worried. "Mr. Garrison." I turned around slowly, almost without strength. It was Mrs. Rose Miller, my neighbor from number 12, 70-something years old, a widow for a decade, always with her 2 cats and her floral apron. We knew each other by sight for 30 years. We greeted each other on the street, but we had never exchanged more than 3 words. We never had a real conversation. She looked at me with wide eyes, frightened, as if she were seeing a ghost. Then she looked to the sides, quickly making sure nobody was watching us, that nobody was listening. She came a step closer, grabbed my arm with her small hand, and told me in a low voice, almost a secret, "What happened to you, Mr. Garrison? Why are you like this? Are you sick? You look terrible. You look like you have seen a dead man." And I didn't know what to answer. The words didn't come out because in a way the dead man was me. They had killed me without touching me. They had buried me without digging a grave. Rose took me by the arm firmly and told me, "Come with me. You can't stay here standing. People are watching." We walked in silence to her house, 3 blocks down through streets I knew by memory, but now seemed like another world. I was looking at the ground, unable to look up, counting the stones in the pavement as if they were the days I had left to live. When we got to her door, a green door with pots of geraniums, she took out her keys, opened it, and made me go inside. Inside it smelled like fresh coffee and sweet bread. The 2 cats looked at me from an armchair with suspicion. Rose sat me in her living room and went to the kitchen. I heard the noise of cups, of boiling water. She came back with a tray, chamomile tea, cookies, an embroidered napkin. She served me as if I were a sick child, and in a way I was. My hands were shaking when I grabbed the cup. She sat in front of me in a floral armchair that smelled like mothballs, and looked at me with those eyes that women who have seen too much have. She said, "Nicholas, I am going to tell you what is happening. What the whole town is saying, because you need to know, and because nobody else is going to tell you." I nodded without speaking. The tea burned my fingers, but I didn't let go. I needed to feel something. Anything. Rose took a deep breath and started talking. She told me that Ethan had been calling half the world during the last week. Partners at the company, acquaintances at the club, neighbors in the subdivision. He told everyone the same thing. That I had dementia. That I had started forgetting things, confusing names, getting lost in the street. That the day of the funeral I didn't recognize some guests. That I had tried to pay with an expired card. That I was a danger to myself. And that the family was taking measures to protect me. She told me all of it in a rush, without pauses, like someone ripping off a Band-Aid in one pull. And I froze, paralyzed, with the cup of tea suspended in the air and a buzzing in my ears that didn't let me think. When I could speak, only one word came out: dementia. I repeated it several times as if by saying it I could understand it. I looked at my hands, firm, without trembling. I remembered the balance sheet of the last quarter of the company. $23,400,000 in assets, 15.7 in liabilities, operating margin of 12%. I remembered it completely, without hesitation. I remembered the number of my first driver's license, my wedding date, the name of the doctor who delivered Ethan. I remembered every contract I signed in the last 40 years, and I thought, my son is killing me, not with a knife, not with poison. He is killing me with words. He is erasing me from the map while I keep breathing. Rose looked at me in silence, waiting for my reaction. I gave her back the empty cup and stood up. My legs were shaking, but I held myself up. I told her, "Thank you, Rose, for telling me the truth, for not treating me like a crazy person." She stood up too and grabbed my arm. She said, "Nicholas, you have to do something. If you stay quiet, they are going to bury you alive. Ethan is moving fast. He has lawyers. He has contacts. If you don't react now when you want to do it, it will be too late." I nodded. I walked toward the door. Before leaving, I turned around and told her, "I am going to the factory. I am going to prove who I am. I am going to stand in front of my son and tell him he is not going to destroy me." She looked at me with a mix of admiration and fear, and I went out to the street with my heart beating in my throat. I arrived at the factory at 4 in the afternoon. The same factory I built with my hands. The same gate I passed through thousands of times for 40 years. The usual guard, Mr. Frank, was not there anymore. In his place there was a boy of 20-something, with a new uniform and a mean face. When he saw me arrive, he raised his hand like a traffic cop. He said, "ID, please." I looked at him in disbelief. I told him, "I am Nicholas Garrison, the owner of this company, the one who pays your salary." The boy didn't even flinch. He looked at a sheet he had on the desk, ran down a list with his finger, and said, without looking at me, "I am sorry, sir. Your name is not authorized to enter. Management orders." I felt the blood rising to my head. I clenched my fists. I told him, "Look, son, I founded this company before you were born. I placed every brick, every machine, every dollar that is inside here. So you are going to lift that barrier, and you are going to let me pass." The boy looked at me with a calmness that gave me more rage than if he had yelled at me. He said, "Sir, if you don't calm down, I am going to have to call security." Security! On me! I breathed deep. I swallowed the rage. I told him, "Fine. Call someone from inside. Whoever. Let them tell me to my face that I can't come in." The boy nodded, picked up a phone, spoke in a low voice for a minute, then hung up and told me, "You can wait in the lobby. Someone will attend to you." I went into the lobby and sat in one of those plastic chairs they put out for suppliers. Me, sitting like a supplier in my own company. I waited 5 minutes. 10, 20. The receptionist. Another new face. Didn't even look at me. She typed on her computer as if I didn't exist. Finally, the hallway door opened and a woman appeared. Young, 30-something. Straight hair to her shoulders, gray suit, high heels. Perfect smile. One of those smiles that don't reach the eyes. She walked toward me with short steps and extended her hand as if I were a client. She said, "Mr. Garrison, what a pleasure. I am Aura Penelope Medina, executive assistant to Mr. Ethan. How can I help you?" I looked her up and down. I had never seen her in my life. I told her, "I want to speak with my son." She didn't lose the smile. She said, "Mr. Ethan is in a very important meeting. He cannot be interrupted. If you like, I can schedule an appointment for next week. Does Thursday at 10 work for you?" I looked at her in disbelief. I said, "An appointment to speak with my own son in my own company." She tilted her head as if I were a confused little old man. She said, "I understand this can be difficult, Mr. Garrison, but things have changed. There are new processes, new protocols. Everything is for the good of the company." She spoke to me as if I were a hindrance, as if I were nobody, and the worst is she did it with a smile. I got up and walked toward the hallway that led to the offices. Aura stepped in front of me with her arms open as if she were going to physically stop me. She said, "Mr. Garrison, you cannot pass. If you insist, I will have to call security." I stopped. I looked her in the eyes and then looked around. The marble floor I chose. The walls I painted white because Emily said it gave peace. The paintings I bought at an auction in the city. They weren't there anymore. In their place were some horrible abstract paintings, the kind that don't mean anything. Everything had changed. Everything. I told her, "This company is mine. I built it." Aura smiled again and said, "It was yours, Mr. Garrison. Now things are different." And in her voice there wasn't mockery. There was something worse. There was pity. I left without saying anything else. I walked through the parking lot with my head burning, and then I saw them. Two old workers. Martinez from production, who had been with me 25 years, and Lomeli from maintenance. He started as a sweeper, and I promoted him to supervisor. They were smoking next to a truck. When they saw me, they froze. Martinez looked away. Lomeli lowered his head. Neither greeted me. Neither said anything. I passed by them expecting a gesture. A word. Something. But nothing. I got into my car and saw them in the rearview mirror. They were still there with cigarettes in hand, watching me leave. They were afraid. Afraid of being seen talking to me. Afraid of losing their job. Afraid of Ethan. I started the car and left there, not knowing where to go. I drove through streets I knew by memory but now seemed foreign. I passed the park where I took Ethan as a child, the church where I married Emily, the school where my grandson studied. Everything the same. Everything different. I was the one who had changed. Or rather, I was the one they had changed. I drove until the sun went down and the streets got dark. The gas tank marked reserve. I had no money to fill up. I had nowhere to go. I had no one. I parked on a street I didn't know in a neighborhood of low houses and mechanic shops and stayed there with my hands on the steering wheel staring at nothing. Thinking, I am losing everything, and I don't know where to start fighting. But what I didn't know was that someone was watching me, and that person was going to change everything. I parked on an unknown street, and I don't know how long I stayed there. Minutes, maybe an hour. I had been driving in circles not knowing where to go. The car shut off only when the little gas that was left ran out. I stayed in the dark with my hands still gripping the steering wheel, looking through the dirty windshield. The neighborhood was humble. One-story houses with peeling facades. Mechanic shops with the curtains half closed. A little grocery store with a yellow light flickering. A small church at the end of the street with a blue neon cross, I thought. I have no money for gas. I have no money for a taxi. I have no money to eat. I have no one to call. And I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Something I thought I couldn't feel anymore. Fear. Pure and cold fear like when I was a child and got lost at the fair. Then someone tapped on the glass. 3 dry knocks. I jumped. I turned my head and saw a face looking at me from outside. An older man, 70-something years old, with gray hair and skin tanned by the sun. He had hands stained with black grease and wore faded blue coveralls. He looked at me with curiosity without hostility. I rolled down the window a few inches and he said, "Good evening, sir. Are you okay? You have been parked there a long time and haven't gotten out of the car. I wanted to make sure nothing happened to you." His voice was hoarse but kind. He smelled like motor oil and cigarettes. I told him, "I am fine, thank you." but my voice came out broken, cracked, and he realized it. The man looked at me for a few seconds without saying anything. Then he nodded slowly as if he had made a decision. He said, "Look, I have a shop right here across the street. I don't know what happened to you, and I am not going to ask if you don't want to tell me, but you have the face of someone who hasn't eaten in a good while. I have fresh coffee and some sandwiches my neighbor brought me. If you want, I invite you, no strings attached." I looked him in the eyes. There was no malice. There was no agenda. There was only something I hadn't seen in days. Humanity. I opened the car door and got out. My legs were shaking. He held me by the arm and said, "Come on, sir. It's right near here." And we walked together toward his shop. The shop was small. A tin shed with a cement floor stained with oil. There was an old car on a ramp with the hood open and the guts exposed. Tools hanging on the wall. A calendar from 3 years ago. An old radio playing an old song. The man pointed to a plastic chair next to a wooden table and said, "Sit down. I will bring the coffee right now." He disappeared through a door in the back and returned with 2 steaming aluminum cups. He sat in front of me on a wooden stool and said, "I have had this shop for 20 years, and you are Nicholas Garrison. I know you by name. Everyone in town knows the owner of the auto parts factory." I looked at him surprised. He shrugged and said, "It is a small town, Mr. Garrison. News flies." He took a sip of coffee and looked at me calmly. He didn't ask me anything. He just waited. And something in that silence, in that patience, made me open my mouth. I started talking. I told him about Emily's funeral, about Ethan's visit the next day, about the words he said to me, about the blocked cards, the bank, the pharmacy, the restaurant, the company where they didn't let me enter, about Aura Penelope and her plastic smile, about the workers who didn't greet me, about Rose and the rumor of dementia. I told him everything, every humiliation, every blow, every stab. I spoke for an hour without stopping, and he listened to me, without interrupting, without opining, without judging. He just listened. If you are listening to my story right now, I ask you to leave me a comment telling me where you are listening from. Sometimes knowing there is someone somewhere in the world listening to me gives me strength to keep going. Because that night in that shop that smelled of grease and cigarettes, I felt like someone was listening to me for the first time in days. Robert didn't know me. He didn't owe me anything. He had no reason to help me. And yet there he was, listening to me as if my story mattered, as if I mattered, and that in that moment was more valuable than all the money Ethan had stolen from me. When I finished talking, I was empty, exhausted, as if I had vomited everything I had inside. Robert stayed quiet for a moment, looking at his coffee cup. Then he looked up and told me, "Mr. Garrison, I am going to tell you one thing. You are not crazy. Anyone who listens to you for 5 minutes realizes you have a clearer head than most. What is happening to you is not your fault. They are hunting you, and the one who hunts like that, with that coldness, does not stop until finishing the job. Your son is not going to stop until you have nothing. No money, no company, no name. So you have 2 options. Either you let yourself be hunted or you start fighting." I looked at him in silence. He was right. Of course he was right. But fight with what? I had no money. I had no access to my accounts. I had no lawyer. I had no proof of anything, I said. "And how do I fight, Robert? I have nothing." He nodded and got up. He went to the back kitchen and came back with a plate. It had 2 sandwiches, a piece of cheese and a banana. He put it in front of me and said, "First eat. How long has it been since you ate?" I tried to remember. "Yesterday. The day before. I didn't know. My stomach hurt. But not from hunger. From nerves. From rage." I grabbed a sandwich and took a bite. It was cold, but it was the tastiest thing I had tasted in days. Robert watched me eat and said, "After you eat, we think." I ate everything he put in front of me. Every bite gave me back a little strength. When I finished, Robert picked up the plates and said, "Look, Mr. Garrison, I am not a lawyer or a businessman or anything like that. I am a mechanic. I fix cars. But I know something about life. Nobody fights well if they don't sleep and don't eat. Today you stay here. I have a little room in the back where I sleep sometimes when I have to work late. It is not the Hilton Hotel, but it has a mattress and a blanket. Tomorrow, with a cool head, we think about what to do. I looked at him, not knowing what to say. That man didn't know me. He had no obligation to me, and he was offering me more than my own son. The little room was small, a twin mattress on some boards, a gray blanket that smelled of cheap softener, a cross nailed to the wall with a tack, a small window that looked out to the alley. I lay down dressed with my shoes on, looking at the tin roof. Outside I could hear crickets and the distant noise of cars. I thought about Emily. I thought about our big bed with the cotton sheets she washed every week. I thought about how her hair smelled when she hugged me at night. And I wondered what she would say if she saw me there, sleeping in a mechanic shop, hiding from my own son. I closed my eyes and felt the tears rolling down my temples. But I didn't dry them. I let them fall. That night I slept. I don't know how many hours. I don't know if it was 3 or 6 or 10, but I slept. I slept for real, without nightmares, without startled awakenings. And when I woke up with the sun coming through the little window, I felt something I hadn't felt since Emily's funeral. Hope. I didn't know how I was going to fight. I didn't know with what weapons or with what allies. But I knew one thing. I wasn't alone. There was a 70-year-old mechanic who believed in me, who had given me a roof, food, and something more important, dignity. Robert had given me shelter, but the weapons to fight were going to be given to me by another person, someone I didn't expect, someone who had as much to lose as I did. Robert woke me up with a cup of coffee and some news. He said, "Mr. Garrison, I put gas in the car. It is not much, but it is enough to go and come back to your house. Go, solve your things, and if you need anything, I am here. Here what we have plenty of is grease, and what we lack is money. But a coffee and a sandwich there is always." He squeezed my shoulder and accompanied me to the car. Before I got in, he told me, "Remember what I told you. The one who hunts like that doesn't stop until he finishes. Move fast, Mr. Garrison. Don't give them time to finish you off." I nodded, started the engine, and drove toward my house with a knot in my stomach. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but something told me it wasn't going to be good. I arrived at the house around noon. Everything looked the same from the outside. The garden with the rose bushes Emily cared for, the vine climbing the wall, the wooden door I had a carpenter make. But when I entered, I knew something had happened. The study door was open. I always left it closed. I walked there with my heart pounding in my chest, and when I entered, I felt the air leaving my lungs. The desk drawers were open, ransacked, papers thrown on the floor. The bookcase moved, and in the place where the desktop computer was, there were only loose cables and a dust mark. They had taken it, everything, the computer, the document folders, the backup hard drive, the USB drives. 40 years of files disappeared. I stood in the middle of the disaster, unable to move. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw Carla in the doorway. Her eyes were red and her hands were shaking. She said with a broken voice, "Mr. Garrison, forgive me. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't." I asked her what she was talking about, and she told me. Yesterday afternoon Ryan came, my grandson, with a black truck and 2 guys she didn't know. He said Mr. Ethan had sent him to pick up important documents, that they were orders, that it was for grandfather's own good. Carla told him he couldn't take anything without my permission, but Ryan ignored her. They went into the study, emptied everything into boxes, and left, in less than an hour, without leaving anything. Carla tried to call me, but my phone didn't work and she didn't know where to find me. I sat in the desk chair and stared at the empty space the computer had left. In that machine was everything. 40 years of contracts, financial statements, correspondence with clients and suppliers, meeting minutes, powers of attorney, everything that proved who I was and what I had built, and now it was in Ethan's hands. I told Carla, "It is not your fault. You couldn't do anything." But inside I felt the fence closing in. Every day they took something else from me. First the money, then the company, then the name, and now the documents, the proof, the memory. They were erasing me piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop them. Carla was still standing in the doorway, wringing her hands. I told her to sit down. She obeyed, but didn't look at me. She had her eyes glued to the floor. Then she said, "Mr. Garrison, there is something else I have to tell you. I felt a chill in my stomach. She took a deep breath and continued. Mr. Ethan called me yesterday afternoon, after they took the things. He told me they don't need me anymore, that starting next week the house is going to be empty, that you are going to go to a specialized clinic, and the property is going to be put up for sale. I froze. I repeated, "A clinic." Carla nodded. That is what he said, a clinic for people with mental problems. And that I didn't have anything to do here anymore. I looked her in the eyes. Carla Reyes, 15 years working in this house. She arrived when Emily started with the first symptoms and we needed help. She stayed all these years taking care of both of us. Emily trusted her more than anyone. She told her things she didn't tell me. She asked her for advice. She gave her the pearl necklace her mother left her. And now Ethan was kicking her out like an old piece of furniture. I told her, "Carla, listen to me well. I am not going to any clinic. I am not crazy. And this house is not for sale. My son is trying to take everything from me, but I am not going to allow it." She looked up. I saw tears. And I also saw something else. She wanted to believe me. But she was afraid. Carla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said, "I believe you, Mr. Garrison. I have known you for 15 years. I know you are not bad in the head. But Mr. Ethan, he is saying very ugly things. To everyone. To the neighbors. To the people at the company. To whoever wants to listen to him. He says you don't remember things. That you get lost in the street. That you confuse people. He says you are a danger to yourself. And people are believing him, sir. People are believing him because he says it with a lot of confidence. And because you haven't gone out to deny it." I stayed quiet. She was right. I had hidden. I had stayed paralyzed. And meanwhile, Ethan had taken control of the narrative, of my life, of my story. I grabbed Carla's hand. It was cold, trembling. I told her, "Thank you for telling me the truth, for not treating me like a crazy person. Now I need you to do something for me." She nodded, waiting. I told her, "Go home. Rest. Collect what they owe you, and don't come back until I call you. And above all, don't tell anyone we spoke. Not Ethan. Not anyone in the family. Not the neighbors. Nobody." She looked at me with wide eyes. She asked, "What are you going to do, Mr. Garrison?" I told her, "I am going to fight. But I need to do it in silence. If Ethan knows I am reacting, he is going to move faster. I need time." She nodded, got up, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned around and said, "Take care, sir, and may God bless you." Then she left, and I was left alone. I walked through the empty house. Every room was a blow. The kitchen where Emily prepared her famous roast every Christmas. The dining room where we celebrated my mother's 80th birthday. The bedroom where my 2 children were born because Emily didn't want to go to the hospital. Everything was the same, and everything was different. The silence was dense. Heavy, like a wet blanket. Emily's scent was still in some corners. In the closet, in the curtains, in the pillow I hadn't washed. But every day it was fainter, more distant. Soon it was going to disappear. And I was going to be left alone with the walls. If they let me stay, I thought, I need help. I need someone who knows about laws. Someone who knows how this works. Someone to help me fight. Then I thought of Thomas Miller, a childhood friend. We grew up together in the same neighborhood, went to the same school, played on the same football team. He studied law while I went into business. He became a corporate lawyer, specialist in business law. For 40 years he was my legal advisor. He helped me incorporate the company, sign contracts, resolve conflicts. He was honest, intelligent, loyal, but we hadn't spoken for 2 years. A stupid fight about politics at a dinner, we argued. We said things we shouldn't have, and neither of us had the pride to pick up the phone afterwards. Emily told me to call him. That life is short. That pride is poison. But I didn't listen to her, and now she wasn't here, and I needed Thomas more than ever. I went to the landline in the living room, the only one that still worked in the house. I picked up the receiver and dialed Thomas's number. I still knew it by memory. It rang once, twice, 3 times, I thought. He isn't going to answer. He doesn't want to know anything about me. Then I heard a click and a hoarse voice that said, Hello. It was him. I felt my throat close up, I said. Thomas, it is Nicholas. Nicholas Garrison. There was a long silence. Then he said, Nicholas. It has been a long time, I said. Thomas, I need your help. I am in trouble. Serious trouble. My son is destroying me. Another silence. Then he said, Come to my office tomorrow, at 10, and bring everything you have. He hung up without saying goodbye. But it didn't matter. I was going to see him. I had a chance. Thomas agreed to help me. But the proof that changed everything didn't come from him. It was brought to me by someone I didn't expect, someone who knocked on my door that same night. It was almost 11 at night when I heard a knock on the door. 3 soft knocks, almost shy. I got up from the sofa where I was sitting in the dark staring at nothing, and walked slowly toward the entrance. Since Emily's funeral I hadn't received anyone. The neighbors stopped coming. Friends stopped calling. The house had become an island. I looked through the peephole and saw a figure in the shadows. A woman, thin, dark hair tied back. I recognized her immediately. It was Jessica, Ethan's wife, my daughter-in-law, the one who was in my living room the day of the coup looking at the floor while her husband stole my life. I hesitated a moment. Then I opened the door. She entered quickly, almost pushing me, and closed the door behind her. Her eyes were wide open. She looked back as if someone could have followed her. I looked at her closely and saw she was destroyed. Pale as paper, deep dark circles under her eyes, almost black. Her hands were shaking. She had a manila folder pressed against her chest as if it were a life preserver. I said, Jessica, what are you doing here? Did something happen? She looked at me with the eyes of a cornered animal. She said, Dad, I have to show you something. If I don't do it now, I won't have the courage later. And you need to see this. You need to know what is happening. Her voice was a thread. It broke with every word. I told her to sit down, but she shook her head. She said, I don't have time. Ethan thinks I went to the pharmacy on call. If I take too long, he is going to suspect. She sat on the edge of the sofa without leaning back and put the folder on the coffee table. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside there was a pile of printed pages. Jessica started taking out the papers one by one, explaining each thing. She said, I found all this on Ethan's computer. He has a hidden folder. He thought nobody was going to see it, but I saw it. And I copied everything. They were emails. Dozens of emails. Between Ethan and a man named Victor Price. I knew the name. An investor from Chicago who had wanted to buy part of the company a few years ago. I told him no. He seemed shady to me. Too aggressive. And now he was in contact with my son. The emails spoke of corporate restructuring, liquidation of non-productive assets, removal of the majority partner for mental incapacity. I read it 3 times to be sure I understood. They were planning to take the company from me, legally, with papers, with lawyers, with everything. I kept reading. Each page was worse than the last. There were sales contracts with future dates, stock transfers that I never authorized, powers of attorney with my forged signature. I knew because I never signed with that stroke. Emily taught me to make a signature that nobody could copy. And that wasn't my signature. There were also requests for medical opinions addressed to 3 different psychiatrists. They asked for evaluations of severe cognitive deterioration for an 82-year-old patient. The patient was me. The requests were signed by Ethan as the responsible family member. Everything was dated. Everything was organized. Everything was ready to be executed. Only one thing was missing: the signature of the judge declaring me legally incompetent. One of the emails froze my blood. It was dated 3 days before Emily's funeral. It said, Victor, the old lady is about to kick the bucket. As soon as that happens, we move. I have everything ready. Aura already prepared the documents. The old man won't even know what hit him. And further down, Victor responded, Perfect. Between the company and the properties we are talking about, $10 million. You keep 40%, and I keep the rest. In 60 days, we are partners. I felt my stomach turning. I read it again, and again. My son, my own son. He had been planning this for months while Emily was dying in the hospital, while I held her hand and promised her she was going to be okay. Ethan was in his office, calculating how much he was going to make with his mother's death and his father's destruction. I left the papers on the table and stared at them without saying anything. My hands were shaking. I felt nauseous. I felt like the living room was spinning. Jessica looked at me with eyes full of tears. She said, "Dad, I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know anything about this. I knew Ethan was ambitious. I knew he wanted the company. But I didn't know he was capable of this. Of destroying his own father, of forging documents, of hiring psychiatrists to declare you crazy. When I saw it," her voice broke. "When I saw it, I couldn't stay quiet. I couldn't." I asked her, "Why do you bring it to me, Jessica? Why don't you go to the police?" She shook her head. She said, "Because the police are not going to believe me. Ethan has contacts. He has money. He has lawyers. You are the only one who can do something with this." I got up from the sofa. I walked to the window and stared at the empty street. I thought about Emily, about the last week of her life, when the pain didn't let her sleep anymore. One night she squeezed my hand very hard and told me, "Nicholas, be careful with Ethan. He is not the son you think he is. I have seen things. I have heard things. Promise me you are going to open your eyes." I told her yes. Of course, to calm down. But I didn't listen to her. I thought it was the morphine delirium. I thought she was confused. But no, Emily knew. Emily saw what I didn't want to see and tried to warn me. And I didn't listen. Now she was dead, and I was alone with a stack of papers that proved my son was a monster. I turned toward Jessica. She was still sitting on the edge of the sofa with her hands clenched on her knees. I asked her, "Does Ethan suspect anything?" She shook her head. "No, I did it when he wasn't there. I moved everything to a USB drive and deleted the history. But if he finds out," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. I knew what Ethan was capable of doing. I asked her, "Why did you do it, Jessica? You are his wife. You have a son with him. Why risk yourself like this?" She looked at me with wet eyes and said, "Because I can't take it anymore, Dad. I have been enduring this for years. The marriage has been dead for a long time. I only stay for Ryan. But this is too much. What Ethan is doing to you. I can't be part of that. You don't deserve this. I can't look you in the face knowing what I know." Jessica got up. She had to leave before Ethan suspected. I told her, "Jessica, what you did today has a price. If Ethan finds out, he is going to go against you, against Ryan, against everything." She nodded. She said, "I know, but you always treated me well, Mrs. Emily loved me like a daughter. She taught me to cook her special roast. She gave me her mother's necklace when Ryan was born. She told me once, 'If someday Ethan gets difficult, find me. I will help you.' But she isn't here anymore, so I came to you." I felt a knot in my throat. I told her, "Thank you, daughter. Thank you for being brave. I am not going to let you pay for this alone, I promise you." She gave me a quick hug, grabbed her purse, and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she turned and said, "Destroy him, Dad. Destroy Ethan before he destroys you." Then she left through the back door, disappearing into the night. I stayed alone in the living room with the papers scattered on the table. I looked at them for a long time. Each one was a stab wound. Every email, every contract, every forged signature. But they were also something else. They were proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that there was a plan. Proof that my son was a criminal. I thought about Thomas, about the appointment I had tomorrow. Now I had something to show him. Something concrete. Something I could use. But I also thought about Jessica, about the risk she had taken, about what was going to happen to her if Ethan discovered the truth. And I thought about Emily, about her last warning, about how she tried to protect me from the great beyond. I closed my eyes and told her out loud, "Forgive me, my love. Forgive me for not listening to you. But I promise you I am going to fix this. I promise you." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the sofa with Jessica's documents in my hands, reading them over and over again, memorizing every detail, every date, every name, every figure. When dawn came, my eyes were burning and my head was full of numbers. But I also had something I hadn't had in days. Ammunition. Jessica had given me the weapons to fight. Now I just needed an army. Thomas was the first. But I was going to need more. I was going to need someone from inside the family. Someone who knew Ethan. Someone who had as much to lose as I did. And then I thought about Ben, my youngest son, the one who went to Seattle years ago, the one who almost never called, the one who seemed to have forgotten me. It was time to look for him. It was time to see whose side he was on. If this story is reaching your heart, subscribe now. Every day, someone is telling what they could never say out loud. Leave your comment and tell me if you have also lived through something similar. At 10 in the morning the next day, I was sitting in Thomas Miller's office. It was a small office filled with law books piled up to the ceiling, smelling of old coffee and yellowed paper. Thomas was on the other side of the desk with Jessica's documents spread out in front of him. He read them slowly with a furrowed brow, running his hand over his bald head every time he found something new. I watched him in silence, with my heart beating in my throat. When he finished, he left the papers on the table and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him. A mix of rage and astonishment. He said, "Nicholas, this is corporate fraud, forgery of documents, attempted illegal interdiction. Your son can go to jail, and Victor Price too. This is serious. Very serious." I asked him what we could do. Thomas leaned back in his chair and thought. Then he said, "First, we need to block the interdiction. If Ethan manages to get a judge to declare you incompetent, we lose everything. I am going to ask for an emergency injunction. Second, we need more witnesses. Jessica is key, but one person is not enough. We need people from inside the company, shareholders who are loyal to you, someone from the family who can testify in your favor." I thought about Ben again, the one who went to Seattle 10 years ago because he couldn't stand Ethan's character, the one who didn't come to his mother's funeral because he was late to the airport, or so he said. Thomas lent me his phone and I dialed Ben's number. It rang 4 times. I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then I heard his voice. Hoarse, tired. "Hello," I told him. "Ben, it is me. Your father." Silence. Long silence. Then he said, "Dad, what happened? Are you okay?" I told him no, that I wasn't okay, that his brother was destroying me. I told him everything. The coup, the cards, the bank, the restaurant, the company, Jessica's documents, the interdiction, everything. I spoke for 15 minutes without stopping, and he listened in silence. When I finished, there was another long pause. I thought he was going to tell me he couldn't get involved, that he had his life in Seattle, that this was between Ethan and me. But then he said something that broke me. "I am coming there, Dad. Forgive me for not going before. I knew something was wrong, but I was afraid of Ethan. I was always afraid of him." 2 days later, Ben arrived. I saw him enter through the door of Thomas's house, and I felt my knees buckle. He was thinner than I remembered, with gray hair at his temples and wrinkles around his eyes. But he still had the same face as when he was a boy. Emily's same face. He walked toward me and hugged me, hard, without saying anything. I felt my shoulders shaking and I realized I was crying. He was too. We stayed like that for a long while, hugging in the middle of Thomas's office, crying like 2 lost children. Afterwards, he pulled away, looked me in the eyes and said, "I am not going to leave you alone, Dad." He promised. "We are going to end this together." And for the first time in weeks, I felt I could win. During the next 3 days, we worked without stopping. Thomas prepared the lawsuit and the request for the injunction. Ben contacted 3 old shareholders of the company who had always been loyal to me. Mr. Porter, who was my first partner, my cousin Arthur, and Mr. Herbert, an investor who entered in the 90s. All 3 agreed to support me. Jessica, meanwhile, kept gathering evidence. Every night she sent me encrypted emails with more documents from Ethan's computer. Contracts, transfers, messages with Victor Price. Everything was adding up. Everything was fitting together. It seemed the plan was working. It seemed we were going to make it. But on Thursday morning, everything fell apart. Jessica disappeared. I tried to call her cell phone. Off! I sent her messages. No answer. I wrote to her email. Nothing. I called the house, and the maid answered. She told me Mrs. Jessica had left early with Mr. Ethan and hadn't returned, that she took a small suitcase, that Mr. Ethan said they were going to Vermont for a few days. I felt a hole in my stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I told Thomas and Ben to come with me. We drove to Ethan's house, in the Oak Hills subdivision. I rang the doorbell. I waited. The door opened, and there he was, my oldest son, with a smile that froze my blood. Ethan leaned on the doorframe and looked at me with a calmness that was scary. He said, "Dad, what a surprise! What are you doing here?" I told him I was looking for Jessica, that I needed to speak with her. He widened his smile, a wolf's smile. He said, "Ah, Jessica. Yes, she is resting. I took her to a clinic in Vermont. A very nice place. Very quiet. The stress of the grief affected her a lot, you know. She started with insomnia, with anxiety, with weird ideas. The doctor said she needed rest, a few weeks of internment, for her own good." I looked him in the eyes. I knew exactly what he had done. Jessica wasn't sick. Jessica had betrayed him, and he had taken revenge. I stepped closer. I told him, "Ethan, I know what you did. I know everything. The contracts, the transfers, the emails with Victor Price, the forged signatures, the interdiction, everything." He didn't lose the smile. He said, "I don't know what you are talking about, Dad. I think you are confused. Again, I already told you. You are not well. You should go get checked." Ben took a step forward. He said, "Enough, Ethan. We know what you are doing, and we are going to stop it." Ethan looked at him with contempt. He said, "Ah, look who showed up. The prodigal son. The one who ran away to Seattle because he couldn't handle the pressure. Now you come to play the hero." Ben clenched his fists. I grabbed his arm. I told him, "Let's go. There is nothing to do here anymore." And we left with our blood boiling and our souls on the floor. Back in Thomas's office, I let myself fall into a chair. I said, "Jessica was our main witness, the one who had access to everything. Without her, the case weakens. Ethan knows it. That is why he locked her up." Thomas stayed quiet a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Wait. Before disappearing, Jessica did something smart. Something very smart." I looked at him without understanding. He opened his computer and showed me his inbox. There were 3 messages from Jessica sent the night before her disappearance, each one to a different address. Thomas, Ben, and a third one I didn't recognize. In all 3 there was the same thing. Copies of all documents, all emails, all the evidence. Jessica had sent backups, as insurance, in case something happened to her. And she had also forwarded copies to me. Thomas closed the computer and looked at me. He said, "Your daughter-in-law knew this could happen. She knew Ethan was going to discover her sooner or later. That is why she sent everything before. The evidence is safe. The case stands." I felt a relief that loosened my muscles. But I also felt anguish. Because Jessica was still locked in a clinic in Vermont. Alone, scared, paying the price for helping me. I told Thomas, "We have to get her out of there." He nodded. He said, "I am going to request a court order, but I need more. I need something that proves the internment was forced. I need another witness." I stayed in silence. Another witness. Who else knew what was happening? Then I thought of someone who had been there the whole time, someone who saw everything without anyone seeing her. And 2 days later, that person knocked on the door. It was 2 days before the shareholders' meeting when I heard a knock on Thomas's office door. It was 7 in the evening. It was getting dark. Thomas went to open it, and I heard a woman's voice. A voice I knew. I peeked into the hallway and saw her. Carla. My Carla. The woman who worked 15 years in my house. She was standing in the doorway with a grocery bag pressed against her chest, shaking like a leaf. Thomas looked at her with suspicion. He said, "Who are you?" She swallowed saliva and said, "I am Carla Reyes. I worked for Mr. Nicholas and Mrs. Emily for 15 years, and I have something to show you." I got closer. I put my hand on her shoulder. I told her, "Come in, Carla. You are among friends." We sat her in a chair and gave her a glass of water. Her hands were shaking when she grabbed it. Thomas asked her what she brought. She took a deep breath, opened the grocery bag, and took out a stack of papers. Receipts, printed photos, and a spiral notebook. She put everything on the desk. She said, "Sir, I worked 15 years in that house. I saw things, I heard things, and I kept things because Mrs. Emily asked me to." Thomas and I looked at each other. Carla continued, "Mr. Ethan always treated me as if I were invisible. as if I didn't exist. He talked on the phone in front of me. He left papers on the table. He never greeted me, he never looked at me, but I was there, I was always there. And I saw everything. Thomas started reviewing what Carla had brought. There were receipts of bank deposits to accounts that weren't the company's. There were photos of documents she took with her cell phone when Ethan left them on the dining table. There were handwritten notes with instructions for Aura. There were copies of contracts Ethan signed without me knowing. And there was a notebook where Carla had written down for months every suspicious conversation she heard. Dates, names, exact quotes, everything. Thomas looked up from the papers and said, "Mrs. Carla, how long did you keep all this?" she said. "Almost a year, sir. Since Mrs. Emily asked me to do it, I felt my chest tighten." I asked her, "Carla Emily asked you to keep this?" She nodded. She said, "Yes, Mr. Nicholas. It was a few months before she got very bad. She called me to her room, closed the door, and told me, 'Carla, I am seeing things I don't like. Ethan is changing. He is doing things in secret. I don't want to worry Nicholas because he already has a lot with taking care of me. But I need you to be my eyes. Keep everything you see. Write down everything you hear. And if someday something happens to Nicholas, take it to a lawyer.' That is what she told me. And I promised her I was going to do it. I felt my eyes filling with tears. Emily, my Emily. She knew. She always knew. And she protected me in the only way she could." Thomas put Carla's documents together with Jessica's emails. Now he had a complete file. Emails, forged contracts, illegal transfers, first-hand testimonies, photos, notes, everything. I told him, "Is it enough to get Jessica out of the clinic?" He nodded. He said, "It is enough for that, and for more. I am going to request an emergency court order. With this, I can prove that Jessica's internment was forced, that there is no legitimate diagnosis, that it is a kidnapping disguised as medical treatment." He got up, grabbed his briefcase, and said, "I am going to the courthouse right now. If we are lucky tomorrow morning, Jessica will be free." He left the office almost running, and I stayed there looking at Carla, not knowing how to thank her. The next morning, Thomas called me at 7. He said, "We have the order. I am leaving for Vermont." 3 hours later, he sent me a message. "We have her. Jessica is free. We are on our way." I felt my heart return to my chest. I sat in a chair and took a deep breath. Ben looked at me and said, "Are you okay, Dad?" I told him yes, that Jessica was free, that she was coming here. He smiled. It was the first time I saw him smile since he arrived. At 2 in the afternoon, Thomas arrived at the office with Jessica. When I saw her, I felt a punch in the stomach. She was skinny, pale, haggard. Her lips were dry and her hair was dirty, but her eyes were shining, with rage, with determination. She hugged me and whispered in my ear, "I am ready, Dad. I am going to finish him." We all sat around Thomas's desk. Him, me, Ben, Jessica, Carla. And Thomas explained the situation. Ethan had called an extraordinary shareholders meeting for Thursday. In that meeting, he was going to present a motion to remove me as president of the company for mental incapacity. He was going to show the supposed medical reports. He was going to ask to be named interim president. And with the support of Victor Price and other shareholders he had bought, he was probably going to win the vote. If that happened, I lost the company. I lost everything. And Ethan got away with it. Thomas looked at all of us and said, "But we are going to be there, and we are going to go in with everything." Thomas explained the plan. He was going to arrive at the meeting with a court order that prevented any motion related to my supposed incapacity. He was going to present the proof of fraud, the emails, the forged contracts, the illegal transfers. He was going to publicly denounce Ethan and Victor Price in front of all the shareholders. And most importantly, Jessica was going to enter with me, Ethan's wife, on her father-in-law's side. That was going to be a devastating blow. I asked Thomas, "Do you think it will work?" He looked at me seriously and said, "Nicholas, in a trial, the one with the best evidence wins, and we have the best evidence. But in a shareholders' meeting, image also matters. And the image of your enemy's wife standing next to you, that is priceless." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room looking at Emily's portrait over the fireplace. I thought about everything that had happened in the last few weeks. The funeral, the coup, the humiliations, the loneliness, and I also thought about the people who had appeared to help me. Robert the mechanic who gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. Jessica who risked everything to give me the proof. Carla who kept for months what Emily asked her to. Ben who finally faced his fear and came to fight with me. Thomas who put pride aside and agreed to help an old friend. I thought, I am not alone. I was never alone. I just didn't know it. The next morning I went to see Robert. I told him everything. The meeting, the plan, the evidence. He listened to me in silence, wiping his hands with a greasy rag. When I finished, he said, Mr. Garrison, I don't know anything about companies or meetings or laws. I am a mechanic. I fix cars. But I do know one thing. I know how to be on the right side. And you are on the right side. So if you need me there, I will be there. I looked at him with wet eyes. I told him, Robert, you already did a lot for me. You don't have to. He interrupted me. He said, Sir, I don't have to do anything. But I want to. And that is different. He gave me a handshake that felt like a hug, and I knew he was going to be there, that everyone was going to be there. Thursday arrived. I woke up at 5 in the morning without needing an alarm. I showered with hot water. I shaved carefully. I put on the dark suit I wore the day of my wedding with Emily, the same one I wore the day I inaugurated the factory, the same one I wore when they gave me the Businessman of the Year award. I looked in the mirror and saw an 82-year-old man, with wrinkles and gray hair and spots on his hands. But I also saw something else. I saw a man who hadn't given up. I saw a man who still had strength. I saw a man who was going to walk into that room and look his son in the eye. I adjusted my tie, took a deep breath, and said out loud, Today, Ethan, you are going to know who I am. And when I walked into that boardroom with Jessica by my side, with Ben behind me, with Thomas and Carla and Robert and everyone else, I saw my son's face, and I knew I had already won. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor of the building I built 40 years ago. The same walls I raised, the same marble floor I chose, the same mahogany table I had brought because Emily said it gave seriousness. I arrived at 9:30 in the morning. The meeting was at 10. I parked in front of the main entrance and stayed a moment inside the car, looking at the facade. There was my name in gold letters, Garrison Industrial Group, the name that cost me 40 years of work, the name my son wanted to erase. I took a deep breath. I opened the door and got out of the car. I felt the morning sun on my face, and I thought, today this ends. One way or another, today it ends. I saw the shareholders entering through the main door. Some I had known all my life. Mr. Porter, my first partner. My cousin Arthur. Mr. Herbert, who invested with me in the 90s. They nodded at me discreetly without stopping. Others were new faces. People in expensive suits and fake smiles. Victor Price's people. Investors Ethan had brought in during the last few months to secure the votes. And at the door controlling who entered and who didn't was Aura Penelope, with her business suit, her electronic tablet, and her plastic smile. She saw me arrive and her smile froze, but she didn't say anything. She just stood there, waiting, like a spider in her web. But I wasn't coming alone. Behind me came Ben, my youngest son, with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the door. Next to him, Thomas Miller with a leather briefcase full of documents and an expression of someone about to enter a war. Behind them, my cousin Arthur and 3 old company advisors who had decided to support me. And at the end, walking with her back straight and looking ahead, came Jessica, Ethan's wife, the mother of his son, the woman he locked in a clinic to silence her. And now she was there, on the enemy's side, on the right side, and seeing her, I knew we had already won the first battle, because Ethan didn't expect this. He didn't expect his own wife to betray him. We walked toward the door. Aura Penelope stepped in the middle with the tablet raised like a shield. She said, Mr. Garrison, you are not on the guest list. You cannot enter. I looked her in the eyes. Those cold eyes that had looked at me with contempt a few weeks ago. I said, I built this building. I founded this company. I pay your salary. Step aside. She didn't move. Then Thomas took a step forward, took a document out of his briefcase, and put it in her face. He said, Court order. Injunction for the protection of rights of Mr. Nicholas Garrison. If you try to prevent his entry, I will have you arrested for contempt. Aura looked at the document. She looked at Thomas. She looked at Jessica. And she stepped aside without saying a word. The path was free. We went up to the third floor in the elevator. Nobody spoke. Only the hum of the motor and our breathing could be heard. When the doors opened, I saw the hallway that led to the boardroom. At the end, the double wooden doors were open. Ethan's voice could be heard inside, talking, giving a speech. We walked there. My shoes sounded on the marble. Every step was a heartbeat. When I reached the door, I stopped. Inside, the room was full. 25 people sitting around the table, and at the head, standing in a navy blue suit and red tie, was Ethan, saying, "We are here to make official a new stage in the history of this company." He saw me, and his voice died in his throat. I walked into the room slowly, without rushing, looking him in the eye. Behind me the others entered. Ben, Thomas, Arthur, Jessica, the advisors. And at the end, Robert with his clean coveralls and his mechanic hands, who stayed standing by the door like a guardian. Ethan looked at me without blinking. Then he looked at Jessica, and I saw his face crumble, as if he had been punched in the stomach. I walked to the front of the room and planted myself in front of him. Thomas put the briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out a stack of documents. He dropped them with a dry thud, and he said loudly so everyone could hear, "Mr. Nicholas Garrison is the only legal president of this company. Here are the proofs of corporate fraud, forgery of documents, and attempted illegal interdiction committed by Ethan Garrison and Victor Price." The silence was total. Nobody breathed. Victor Price, who was sitting near Ethan, stood up suddenly. He said, "This is ridiculous. It is slander. You cannot enter here." And Thomas interrupted him, raising his hand. He said, "Mr. Price, your name appears in 47 emails detailing the plan to strip Mr. Garrison of his company through fraud. It also appears in stock purchase contracts that Mr. Garrison never signed. I suggest you call your lawyer. You are going to need him." Price stayed quiet. He opened his mouth and closed it. Then he turned to Ethan, looking for support. But Ethan wasn't looking at him. Ethan was looking at me, and in his eyes there was something I had never seen. Fear. Thomas kept talking. He explained every document, every email, every forged contract. He showed the illegal transfers, the requests for psychiatric reports, the plan to lock Jessica in the Vermont clinic. Everything. The shareholders listened in silence with horrified faces. Some looked at Ethan. Others looked at the floor. When Thomas finished, he pointed to Jessica and said, "Mrs. Jessica Garrison, wife of the accused, provided this evidence voluntarily. She was committed against her will to a psychiatric clinic in Vermont as retaliation for reporting these crimes. She was released 2 days ago by court order." He looked at the whole room and finished. Ethan Garrison's own wife could not stand to see what her husband had become. That is why she is here. On the right side. Ethan was still standing at the head of the table, but he didn't look the same anymore. His shoulders had slumped. His face had turned gray. He looked at me with a mix of hate and defeat. I took a step closer. I looked him in the eyes. Those eyes that were once those of a boy who asked me to teach him to ride a bike. Those eyes that were now those of a stranger. And I told him slowly so every word would reach the bottom. "The day after burying your mother, you sat in my living room and told me, 'Your good life is over, Dad.' Do you remember?" He didn't answer. I continued. "Well, today, son, you discover one thing. Your good life never started. Because a good life is not built by stealing. It is not built by lying. It is not built by destroying your own blood." Ethan lowered his head. He said nothing. He had nothing to say. Aura Penelope had disappeared through the back door. Victor Price was sunk in his chair with his phone in his hand, dialing desperately. The shareholders looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Then Mr. Porter, my first partner, the man who was with me from the beginning, stood up, looked at me, and said, "Nicholas, this company was always yours, and it is still yours. You have my vote." Then Arthur stood up. Then Mr. Herbert. Then others. One by one, the shareholders who really knew me stood up. Some applauded, others nodded. And I stayed there, standing in front of my defeated son, feeling that the weight I had carried for weeks was finally lifting from my shoulders. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I didn't shout for joy. I just took a deep breath and looked around. I saw Ben with wet eyes and a trembling smile. I saw Thomas closing his briefcase with the satisfaction of a job done. I saw Jessica pale but firm, looking at her husband with an expression that wasn't hate but pity. I saw Carla, who had entered at the end without me noticing, standing next to Robert at the door, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. And I saw Robert the mechanic, who gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, looking at me with pride as if he were my own father. I said to everyone, "Thank you." Just that. Thank you. Then I looked up at the ceiling toward where I imagined Emily was and thought, "We did it, my love. We did it together like always." But the story wasn't over yet. There was one last conversation missing, the hardest one of all. 2 days after the meeting, I called Ethan and asked him to come to the house. Alone, without lawyers, without Jessica, without anyone. I wanted to talk to my son one last time. I wanted to look him in the eye and understand. He accepted. He arrived at 5 in the afternoon when the sun was already going down and the light entered golden through the windows. I opened the door and saw him. He was haggard, deep circles under his eyes, his tie loose, his suit wrinkled. He seemed to have aged 10 years in 2 days. I let him in without saying anything. We walked to the living room and sat in the same places where we sat the day of the coup. Him in Emily's chair, me on the sofa opposite. The same room, the same light. But everything was different. This time the one who had the power was me. We stayed a moment in silence. He looked at the floor. I looked at him. Finally I spoke. I said, "Ethan, I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer me with the truth. Even if it hurts, even if it is horrible. The truth." He nodded without looking up. I took a deep breath and asked, "Did you ever love me, son?" The silence became thick, long. He kept looking at the floor. I saw his jaw trembling, that he was clenching his fists on his knees. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. I thought he wasn't going to answer, but then he looked up and looked me in the eyes. And what I saw there broke my heart. It wasn't evil. It wasn't hate. It was pain. An old, deep sist's pain. Ethan spoke slowly with a hoarse voice. He said, "I don't know, Dad. I don't know if I ever loved you. What I know is that I always wanted to be like you, since I was a boy. I wanted you to look at me like you looked at the company. I wanted you to be proud of me like you were proud of your achievements. But I never could. I was never enough. Ben was the sensitive one, the good one, the one who looked like Mom. And I was the ambitious one, the hard one, the one who never did anything right. Every time I tried something, you corrected me. Every time I proposed something, you improved it. You never let me win. You never let me shine. And that rotted me from the inside until one day I realized that the only way to be like you was taking everything from you. I listened to him without interrupting. Every word entered me like a knife. But not of rage, of sadness, because I realized he was right. Not in what he did. That has no justification. But in what he felt. I had seen him as my heir, not as my son. I had trained him to take my place, but I never asked him if he wanted that place. I never asked him what he dreamed, what he needed, what hurt him. I raised him to be strong, but I didn't teach him to ask for help. I raised him to win, but I didn't teach him to lose. And he became this. A man who didn't know how to do anything other than destroy, because he never learned to build on his own foundations, only on mine. I told him, "Ethan, what you did has no forgiveness. You wanted to rob me, you wanted to lock me up, you wanted to erase me, and you did it while your mother was dying in a hospital. That I am never going to forget." He nodded without saying anything. I continued, "But you are my son, and I don't want to see you in jail. I don't want Ryan to grow up visiting his father in prison, so I am going to give you a way out, one way out." He looked at me with wide eyes. I said, "You are going to resign from the company. Today. You are going to return every cent you diverted. You are going to ask Jessica for forgiveness, on your knees if necessary, and you are going to disappear for a while. Far away, where nobody knows you, where you can start from scratch. If you do all that, I drop the charges. And this ends here." Ethan looked at me in silence. Then he asked, "And if I don't accept?" I looked him in the eyes and told him. Then I let justice decide. Thomas has everything ready to file the lawsuit. Corporate fraud, document forgery, kidnapping. You are going to go to trial, and you are going to lose. Not because of me, because of the evidence. And when you lose, you are going to go to prison. Minimum 5 years, maximum 15. So you decide, son. You can disappear with dignity, or you can disappear in a cell. He stayed quiet for a long moment. I saw how his hands shook, how he clenched his jaw, how he looked around the room as if looking for an exit that didn't exist. Finally he got up, looked at me, and said, "I accept." Then he walked toward the door and left, without saying goodbye, without turning back, without saying anything else. That was the last time I saw Ethan. A week later he signed his resignation before a notary, returned the diverted money, almost all of it, because part of it Victor Price had already spent. He wrote a letter to Jessica asking for forgiveness, and he went to Europe, to London, they told me. He has an acquaintance there who got him a job in imports. I don't know how he is doing. I don't ask. Ryan stayed with Jessica. Sometimes he visits me on Sundays. We talk little, but he is there, and that is something. Jessica asked for a divorce and got it in 3 months. I did what I had to do. I gave her 10% of the company's shares. She didn't want to accept. She said she hadn't done it for money, I told her. I know. That is why I am giving it to you. Now she has a nice house downtown, with a garden for Ryan. She opened an art gallery with a partner. She is doing well. She smiles more. Sometimes she comes to have coffee with me and we talk about Emily, about the old times, about what she did for me when nobody else dared, and I always tell her the same thing. Thank you, daughter. Without you, I wouldn't be here. I stayed as president of the company 6 more months. Just enough time to organize everything, to close the bad contracts, to kick out Victor Price's people, to return confidence to the shareholders who had been scared, and to do something I owed myself. I had Robert's shop remodeled. New roof, polished cement floor, first-class tools, a sign with his name at the entrance. He didn't want to accept. He said it was fine like that he didn't need anything. I told him, "Robert, you gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You gave me coffee when I didn't even have money for bread. You gave me dignity when my own son had taken it from me. This is not charity. It is justice." He stayed quiet a moment. Then he gave me a handshake and said, "All right, sir. But Sunday coffee is still free." When everything was stable in the company, I called Ben to my office. I sat him in front of me and said, "Son, I already did my part. 42 years leading this company. I don't have strength for more. I want to go home. I want to take care of your mother's roses. I want to live what I have left in peace, so the company is yours." He looked at me with wet eyes and said, "I want it, Dad, and I promise I am going to take care of it." We signed the papers that same afternoon. Today my life is quiet. I wake up early, like always. I eat breakfast alone in the kitchen with the radio low. I go out to the garden to check the roses Emily planted 30 years ago. I prune them. I talk to them. I tell her how everything is going. Then I sit on the iron bench we bought on a trip to Mexico and stay a while looking at the sky. At 11, Carla arrives. She came back to work with me last month. I doubled her salary and gave her her own key. Now she is not my employee. She is my family. On Sundays, I go to Robert's shop. We drink coffee in his aluminum cups and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes he helps me fix something on the car. Sometimes we just stay quiet listening to the radio. And it is okay. It is okay like this. People ask me if I hate Ethan, if I want to see him destroyed, if I am glad he lost everything. And the truth is no. I don't hate him. I can't. He is my son. He has my blood. He has Emily's nose. He has my father's hands. How am I going to hate that? Hate is a prison, and I was already a prisoner too long. But I don't forgive him either. Not yet. Maybe never. Because forgiving is not forgetting. Forgiving is letting go of the weight to be able to walk, and I let go of the weight. But I didn't forget what happened. I didn't forget the day he sat in Emily's chair and told me my good life was over. I didn't forget the humiliations. I didn't forget the lies. I didn't forget Jessica locked in a clinic. That is not forgotten. That is carried. But it can be carried without crushing you. If someone who is going through something similar asks me for advice, I would tell them this: don't give up. Even if your own blood betrays you, even if they take everything from you, even if they tell you that you are crazy, even if they look at you with pity, even if they close doors on you, even if they leave you alone, you are still you, your name, your story, your dignity, that nobody can steal from you. They can take your money, they can take your company, they can take your reputation, but they cannot take what you are. And if you stay standing, if you don't give up, if you look for help, even if you are ashamed, you are going to find good people. People like Robert, people like Thomas, people like Carla, people who appear when you need them most. And with those people you can fight, and you can win. I won at 82 years old, without money, without a phone, without access to my accounts. I won. So you can too. And you who listened to me until here, were you ever betrayed by someone in your own family? What did you do? What would you do differently if you could go back? Leave me your answer in the comments. Tell me your story. Because sometimes telling what happened is the first step to healing. If this story touched your heart, I ask you to like and subscribe to the channel. Your comment helps me continue telling these stories. Stories of common people. Stories of pain. Stories of struggle. Stories like yours. Thank you for listening to me until the end. See you in the next story.